dope cards, home ranges, and suppressors for PRS this week on Mail Call Mondays. Mail Call Mondays is brought to you by Modular Driven Technologies. If you need a chassis system for your precision rifle, check out MDTTAC.com. I'm John McQuay with 8541 Tactical, and this is Mail Call Mondays, the show that answers your questions about precision rifles, optics, and equipment. Welcome to another Mail Call Mondays, and this Monday our first question comes from Patreon, and Winners asks, "Hi John, assuming you can have only one dope card, a universal dope chart, to carry around, how would you set it up? I.e., you'll make that dope chart under what wind condition, under what temperature condition, and so on. I'm thinking around 50 degrees Fahrenheit, east wind, 10 miles per hour, and altitude from my nearby range. What do you think is a good start?" Well, Winners, we can look at this two different ways. First of all, for actual competition and precision rifle shooting at long range, I would not use a universal dope card. It's just not going to be close enough. It's going to result in quite a few misses at longer range. Now, for an emergency situation, like for instance, law enforcement or military, in my designated marksman rifle that rides in the trunk of my car, I do have a generic dope card taped to the side that is just a quick reference in a last-ditch effort. Now, that dope card is set up for a standard day, and what a standard day is sea level, 59 degrees Fahrenheit, and 29.92 inches of mercury for the barometric pressure. That pretty much covers not any day whatsoever around here, but it is a baseline dope that I can adjust off of based on that. Now, if we're actually talking about dope cards to go out on a training day at the range or go out for a precision rifle competition, then one dope card is not going to cover all situations. What you really need to do is make up a stack of dope cards with a graduated a graduated weather condition from each one through the variety of shooting conditions that you would encounter. Now, to do this, what I recommend you do is instead of basing it on temperature, barometric pressure, and altitude, I recommend you base it on density altitude. Now, going into density altitude is a little bit more in-depth than we're going to go through on this video here, but suffice to say, it is a single factor that describes all the conditions, altitude, barometric pressure, and temperature in one factor. It's generally used in aviation, and it describes the density of the air that you're moving through. Now, when we shoot a bullet, the bullet doesn't care what the temperature of the air is. The bullet doesn't care how high its elevation is. The bullet doesn't care how many inches of mercury. All it cares is how dense the air that is flowing around it is. So density altitude boils all those factors down into one that you can use to evaluate how the atmosphere is going to affect the bullet. Now, for density altitude, it makes it easy to make dope cards, and I would recommend you start out with every 1,000 foot for density altitude. So start at the coldest that you're going to find for your general area, convert those atmospheric factors into density altitude, and then go up every 1,000 foot until you reach the hottest. And that is how you would make up your dope cards. Now, what this will do is if you have a dope card, say for 1,000 foot and a dope card for 2,000 foot, and then you go out and you calculate your density altitude for the day and it's 1,500, well, then you would go right between those two dope cards. So you would make an adjustment based on your high and your low, and you would go right down the middle on them. That makes it really easy to have a stack of cards and to figure it out very quickly. Now, when you're going out to the range for that shooting day, you can look at what the weather forecast is for the range, and you can take all those factors, plug them into a density altitude calculator, and figure out what your DA is for your weather conditions for that day, and pull that card, and then use that card for the range, and it's going to get you very close. When you're at a competition, you can either plug them into a calculator on your smartphone, or you can just ask one of the other competitors there, hey, what do you have for DA? And if they have a Kestrel, anything except the really low-level Kestrels will read out density altitude. So you can buy a less expensive Kestrel and not even get into the ballistic calculator versions and have a DA readout on the Kestrel that tells you the density of the air where you're standing. So that makes it very simple. Now, even if you have a Kestrel or you have a ballistic calculator on your smartphone, it may be a really good idea to make up density altitude cards and keep them in your bag. That way, if you have a battery failure or you have any other kind of mechanical malfunction with your actual ballistic computer, then you can pull out those cards, you can look at them, and you can figure out where you need to be at. So they're a really good thing to have, just no matter what your current situation is. Now, as far as what the wind conditions for your dope cards are going to be, that is really going to depend upon you, but what I generally prefer to have is a reading for 5 miles per hour and a reading for 10 miles per hour. So if I have a 5 and a 10, then I can factor out anything in between, and I will do that as a full value wind. It doesn't really matter if it's a 3 o'clock or 9 o'clock, it just matters that it's a full value wind. Now, if you are limited for space, like say for instance, you're making that emergency dope card for your scope cap or the side of your rifle, then just go with the 10 mile an hour wind. Because if you have the 10, you can have it for 5, or you can move the decimal point for 1. So it makes it very easy to take that 10 mile an hour wind and adjust it for everything else. And that will get you going, and that's just a really down and dirty way to do it. Now, to actually calculate the dope, I recommend that you use JBM Ballistics online. Their website is free. It makes it really easy to go in and plug in all your factors. They've got a pretty decent bullet library, so it makes it easy to calculate what you need for these dope cards. You will need an accurate muzzle velocity, and you will need to know what kind of bullet you're shooting, but based off of that, you can get some really accurate dope lined out through that website. And we'll leave a link to that website behind the link to all links down below. Now, I know this is kind of a broad overview. If you guys really want to see in-depth how to make a stack of dope cards that you can utilize throughout just about any shooting situation that you're going to encounter, leave me a comment down below and I will consider doing a full video on just how to set up a set of dope cards that will cover you. And it doesn't really cost anything other than the printer and the ink. It does require an online connection, but you can go to just about any local library in the US and get on a computer and access the JBM Ballistics website. So if you're interested in that, drop a comment down below. And if you want to know more about Patreon, click the link down below. Patreon is a great way for you guys to support the content that you know and love, and we would love to have you over there. You can get a little sneak peek into some of the other things that we're doing that we don't put up on the channel, and find out some news and some things that are going on behind the scenes. So again, click the link to Patreon. We would love to have you. Our next question comes from Jerry, and Jerry asks, if you had the ability to set up a home private range out to 1,000 yards, how would you set it up? What would you set? Dirt hills every 100 or a mobile shooting station? What type of barricades and obstacles would you choose, and what type of targets? Any other ideas would be great. Well, Jerry, I wish I had the opportunity to set out a 1,000-yard range here, but just because of the density of our population and because of the price of land, I don't have the ability to do it where we are living at right now. Hopefully, after I retire, we can move out west and we can set up something like that. But there are a couple of key considerations when you're setting up a range at home, especially something as deep as a 1,000-yard range. That requires a pretty decent amount of acreage. What you need to consider is where that property line is beyond that 1,000-yard target. If your property line is directly behind the 1,000-yard target, you're really going to need to set up a berm because you don't want the bullets to leave your property. That's a recipe for disaster. Now, if you have a decent amount of impact area behind that 1,000-yard target, then it's not so much of a deal. You don't really have to have a berm because those bullets are going to be coming in at a fairly severe trajectory, and they're not going to go much past your 1,000-yard target before they impact the ground. So if you have a large amount of land backing up into, or if you have a mountain or hillside behind you, then berms aren't that big of a deal. If you don't, if it's flat and your property line is right behind your 1,000-yard target, make sure you push up a berm at least behind those 800, 900, 1,000-yard targets back there. That way you're not running bullets into a neighbor's property. Now, as far as coming in closer than that, if you're in inside of 800 yards or so, berms are not really going to be that big of a deal because, again, that trajectory is going to be dropping enough. The bullets are going to impact the ground before they leave your property line. So there, you don't have to set in permanent target emplacements. You can set targets on engineer stakes or T-posts or whatever, and that way you can move them around and keep things fresh. So for that, I definitely would not go with built-in target emplacements. I would go with something that you can quickly change up. So every couple of months you can go out there and move some targets around and really have a fresh target array to be able to engage. Now the sizes of targets are going to depend upon your skill level and really what you like to shoot. Do you like to shoot static steel? Do you like to shoot swinging steel? I would recommend the further out, make sure that you have targets that have a nice loud audible ring. So the mounting system needs to be fairly high up the top and the steel needs to be thinner so that it will actually vibrate fairly well. There are targets out there that really ring nice and loud, and there are targets out there that, due to their mounting system, they're mounted more rigidly. They don't have a great ring. If you are shooting on your own and you don't have a spotter, being able to get that audible return is really nice to make sure you heard a hit or not. If you're in prone shooting a 1,000-yard target, you're probably going to be able to see your impacts on the target. But if you start shooting barricades or you start shooting in less stable positions, you may not be able to recover and get back on the target quick enough to watch that impact. So being able to hear that ding is not only satisfying, but it can definitely help you out in the long run. But again, as far as targets, a good variety of sizes and a good variety of types can really add to the enjoyment of shooting. I would put out at least one Know Your Limits rack, maybe at 500 yards, something that you can push further out as you get more skilled at shooting. Know Your Limits racks are great if you're trying to figure out a problem or if you're just testing yourself. And they're really a ton of fun to shoot. Plus, most competitions will have some version of Know Your Limits, so having a rack that you can practice on will really help you out. And regular swing set type Know Your Limits racks are not that expensive, and you don't even have to go that route if you're going to have permanent target emplacements. You can just get various different size plates and drop them in on T-posts, and that will work just fine. Although it makes it a little bit more difficult to move if you want to move it out to a greater range later on. Now, when we get into barricades, barricades are really whatever you like to shoot. If it is a solid emplacement that you're not going to have to get things out of a shed and then put things back, then stuff like a rooftop is something I would definitely have. And when you build a rooftop, there are a variety of ways to build them, but you can use something like 4x4s or larger, set them into the ground, and then set a bar across them that you can move at various different points. And then you can build a small narrow roof deck that you can set at various different angles. I would recommend building a lip off the front of the deck so that it simulates the opposite pitch of the roof, because that can change how you address that based on where you put a barricade. If you run a bipod, and if you run the bipod legs up or legs down. So it's interesting to be able to set that up and cause different shooting situations. But an adjustable pitch works great because techniques that you're going to use at a low pitch will not work the same at a high pitch. So being able to vary that for the different conditions you're going to find on different ranges is a great option. Now, as far as the other barricades, you can use plywood nailed into, again, 4x4s or screwed into 4x4s. I'd recommend you just do it with deck screws. And then you can cut a variety of ports at a varying different heights out of that. And it will make it very interesting or very difficult depending upon the shapes that you use and how large you make those shapes. Using plywood screwed into 4x4s that are set in the ground will allow you to take that plywood off as it gets chewed up, or if you decide to switch up the shapes later on, and be able to put a new piece up very easily. I would also go ahead and set up a regular 2x4 type barricade, but leave that freestanding so it's not actually set into the ground. And that will require you not only to vary up the way that you utilize a barricade bag on the wider 2x4s versus the narrow plywood, but it's also going to require you to adjust how you address the barricade and how much pressure you put into it to keep that barricade from wobbling. It's not good to have all your barricades that you build super sturdy because you're going to run into them out in the field where they are not sturdy. Beyond that, having some 50-gallon drums that you can set up in a variety of different configurations is great. Having a couple of tires, not too many, a couple of tires that you can set up in varying different shapes or forms, that will help you out too. Too many tires, though, becomes a mess and it becomes a disposal hazard later on. It's really a pain in the butt and it can become very expensive to dispose of a lot of tires. So I would recommend not going with, I see a lot of people do, just go get a pile of tires, because you can get them out there pretty cheap. It's just getting rid of them at the backside of it can be difficult. One thing that I really like that I wish I had the ability to set up here is a boat simulator, or a platform suspended by chains or cables that you shoot from, and the platform will move as you move on it. That has become more and more popular at more matches, and it requires a considerable amount of skill to be able to get on it, get everything settled down, and get your shots off and operate the bolt on your rifle without disturbing the shooting platform. So having a boat simulator at your disposal that you can practice on regularly would be a great benefit. They can be made simple or very complex. It can be as easy as setting posts in the ground and then eyelets and then hanging the platform from there, or as complex as angle iron welded together. So really the sky's the limit on that. Now, once you got all that addressed, I wouldn't do anything like a elevated platform unless you really need to be able to get elevated to see your furthest target. We'll see a lot of situations where on private ground that there's a rise or a hill in the middle of the range, and you need to get elevated to be able to see past that and see the farthest target. Elevated platforms are great, but they're more expensive to create, and I would leave that to last until you've got everything else taken care of. Again, unless you actually need it to engage your longest distance target. Elevated platforms can be a ton of fun because you can face the front of them with plywood and make portholes in them for different kind of barricade shooting. Running up and down the stairs to get into position can add some difficulty to it. So they can be a ton of fun, but I would get the other barricades set up and a rooftop simulator and the boat simulator and that set up first before you go build an elevated platform. So I hope that gives you some ideas on how I would set up a personal 1,000-yard range. Now, obviously, I don't have range development certifications or any of that. That's a whole different part of civil engineering that requires quite a bit of education. So that's for a commercial range. There are quite a few other considerations, but for a personal range, those are some things that I would do and some ways that I would go about it. Now, if you go ahead and set up a personal range using some of these recommendations, I'd love to see some photos. So go ahead and shoot me some photos. You can post them up on our Facebook page or just send them to me at 8541tactical@gmail.com. And I'd love to see what you come up with. Our next question comes from Paul, and Paul asks, what suppressors do you recommend for PRS competitions? Paul, we've covered this topic a little bit before, but I'm just going to touch on it again. The suppressor that I run the most right now is a Thunderbeast 30P1. This is one of their older suppressors. I believe they discontinued the design, but it is a titanium direct thread suppressor. It is a 30 caliber, and really it's very simple, very effective. It has not decreased the accuracy of any rifle that we have put it on, and it has increased the accuracy on a couple, and I believe that's due to the extra mass changing the barrel harmonics in a favorable way. But it works absolutely great. We've got an Armageddon Gear suppressor cover on this one. I do recommend running a suppressor cover on a precision rifle because it will cut down the mirage significantly. You just pull it back to allow it to cool in between stages, although I can't really pull it back with this chassis setup. I can't pull it back much. But the cover really cuts down on some of that. Now, the things that I look for in a precision rifle suppressor, I prefer a direct thread. That's my own personal preference, and that is just for the ease of use. I don't have to juggle a bunch of muzzle devices. I don't have to make sure that I have muzzle devices on all the rifles I want to use the suppressor on. And if I change out and go to a different suppressor later on, I don't have to go get all new muzzle devices for all the different rifles. The direct thread is fine. If I scrap this barrel, put a new barrel on it, chances are it's going to be threaded 5/8 24, and I'm going to be able to just go ahead and drop the suppressor right on it and go. We've got a couple of projects in the works. All the barrels that we've got in recently are threaded. This suppressor will screw right on those barrels without the need to purchase another muzzle device. Now, muzzle devices do have advantages because if I remove this, I have bare threads here and no muzzle device on it, so I'm going to have to put a thread protector on it or a brake or a flash hider before I shoot it without the suppressor. Most of the muzzle devices that are out there now act as brakes or flash hiders, so when you remove the suppressor, you don't have to put anything on the muzzle. It's already protected. It's good to go. The drawback of it is you have either a locking mechanism that you have to worry about carboning up, or you have threads on the outside of that muzzle device that you still have to be aware of and not slam them into anything. Some of the muzzle devices, the way the cone or the seating surface behind the threads are designed, they somewhat protect the threads from impact, but you can still drag them across a barricade or do something and end up damaging the threads on your muzzle device. So muzzle devices aren't a 100% cure to make sure that you don't have any damaged threads. And again, as I mentioned, you have to have separate muzzle devices for each rifle, or you have to swap one muzzle device off onto another rifle when you get ready to shoot. And that usually requires some kind of tool, some kind of shim set if you're using a brake to make sure the ports line up. And it's just, for me, it ends up being more trouble than it's worth. Now, I do have suppressors here that do have muzzle devices. I've got a Silencer Co. Saker 556K that is the suppressor that I swap around onto most of my ARs. So those ARs have ASR muzzle devices on them. So in that aspect with ARs, I find it to be fairly useful because I'm going to shoot with some kind of flash hider or brake on those guns anyway, and being able just to screw the suppressor on and not worry about it, it's not that big of a deal. But I'm also not worrying about that suppressor indexing the same way each time. If it's off a little bit, it's not really going to cause me that great of a problem. But again, that's my personal preference. Now, as far as brands, there are tons of brands out there that are good for precision rifles. We've seen Thunder Beast, they tend to be the market leader. There's Gemtech, there's Crux, there's Silencer Co., they're Dead Air. There are a ton of them out there that work. Now, unfortunately, because of the legalities of transferring suppressors back and forth, it makes it a little bit more difficult for us to get suppressors into test. I have a Silencer Co. hybrid that is sitting in jail right now. We did do a conjugal visit with that can, and we took it out with an Area 419 Hellfire brake and mounting system. Area 419 makes a mount for the Silencer Co. hybrid that utilizes their muzzle devices that work with their Hellfire brake. So it makes it easy to pull off the Hellfire brake and swap on the hybrid. Now, unfortunately, because our visit was really short, we concentrated more on how well the mounting system installed in the suppressor, how well it worked mounting on the rifle. We didn't get a lot of return to zero tests done. Really, anything that we saw was anecdotal until we get back out there with the suppressor. But hopefully, it will only be a few more months before the transfer is approved on that can and we can get it in and go out and do some work with the Silencer Co. hybrid. Now, the hybrid is not really a precision rifle suppressor. It is a multi-purpose suppressor, and it's really exciting me because it can go on anything from a handgun all the way up to a .338 Lapua Magnum bolt-action rifle. So it spreads across a very wide spectrum of suppressor use, and it comes with a 5/8 24 end cap so that you can immediately take that can out and put it on a bolt gun like this and run it. So as soon as we get that thing out, we are going to put it on. We'll evaluate it compared to the 30P1, which is pretty much can be considered a baseline for precision rifle suppressors, and then see how it works there, and then see how it works with the Area 419 adapter. But again, that's not something I would recommend for a first precision rifle suppressor. I would recommend going with something like the Thunder Beast Ultra series, which work very well. They've got very good sound suppression, and you can choose the length for what you're going to use. So if you're just wanting a moderator just to bring that volume down a little bit when you're shooting in the tubes, whatever, you can get a shorter Ultra. If you're going to use it on everything up to a 300 Win Mag, you can get the larger Ultra and anything in between. So you really have quite a few options there. And what I would recommend is if you are purchasing your first suppressor, try to consider everything that you want to use that suppressor on and get the suppressor that will work on everything that you have. Because once you start shooting suppressed rifles, you want to suppress all the things. It just ends up being incredibly fun. Now, let's take the opposite view real quick here. I have recommended before that for pure competition, if you are in it completely for where you end up on the score rankings at the end of the day, then a brake is a better option than a suppressor. A brake will more effectively mitigate the recoil. A brake is louder, but you won't run into the issues that you will with Mirage and all the other length issues and things assorted with the suppressor. So if it is a pure competition rifle and you are just in it for where you finish, you want to run a very effective brake on your rifle as opposed to a suppressor. Now, that's not to say suppressors are bad for competition, because I know a lot of high-level shooters that prefer to run suppressors, and the reason is their comfort level. A lot of times we're shooting in obstacles, we're shooting through tubes, we're shooting in close proximity to others, and a suppressor just makes it really more enjoyable for a two-day match when you are shooting a lot of powder and you are shooting in close-in obstacles that will reflect that muzzle blast back at you. So you lose a little bit in target acquisition, you lose a little bit in recoil control, but you gain a lot of enjoyment shooting the system. It's a lot more enjoyable to shoot a suppressed rifle than it is to shoot a braked rifle. That's just my personal opinion, but if you notice that the guys that are really out there running for the points are running brakes, the guys that are out there for the enjoyment of shooting, a lot of times they will run a suppressor, even though there are some drawbacks to doing so. So, hope that answers your questions. Hopefully, a little bit further on in this year, we will get back to doing some reviews on some suppressors. We do have a review of the Gemtech Tracker, which is a very reasonably priced direct thread suppressor that works really well on bolt-action rifles. You can check that review out. We will leave a link to that down below. We were partnered with Silencer Shop to do that review. Hopefully, once Silencer Shop gets relocated and gets set back up, we will be able to get back with them and get some more suppressors in to do some reviews later on this year. So stay tuned for that. And if there's a specific suppressor that you guys are interested in us reviewing, please leave it in the comments section down below. We really don't have anything lined up later on this year, so I would like to look at that and get your input on what you would like to see us do. Now, our last question comes from Nick, and Nick says, "You look like you're in pretty good physical condition, not ogling, just observing." Well, thank you, Nick. With your full-time LE job and getting all the content filmed, edited, and uploaded for the channels, and I also see you like a good beer as well, what's your typical workout routine? Well, Nick, for me, I would love to be able to go into the gym and spend an hour in the gym every day. I enjoy weightlifting. A couple of years back, I was doing a lot of Olympic lifts, squats, deadlifts, that kind of stuff, and I really enjoy it. Not so much for the appearance, but for that feel that you get once you've worn yourself out in the weight room. The problem is, of course, just the times suck. And then the other issue is I am getting older, as much as I hate to admit it. It takes me longer to recover from a hard day in the gym, and it takes me a lot longer to recover from a serious injury. And with Olympic lifts, there is the potential there for serious injury if you're not very careful. So if you have a competitive mindset and you're pushing, there is the potential to become injured quite easily there. So I had to kind of find a different physical fitness routine that would allow me to stay fit, but would utilize less of my time and allow me to turn around and get my day started a whole lot quicker. So I went back to running. First of all, I really hate running, but running is a necessary evil, and through accepting that it's a necessary evil and getting out, I've started to learn to enjoy it, or at least a way to hate it less. So my current routine is I wake up in the morning, I lace up my shoes, I go out and I run for around 30 minutes. I'll usually do 3 miles or a little bit longer. It depends on what workout I pick and what I'm actually concentrating on, if it's intervals, if it's speed, if it's just a relaxing, get rid of stress run. So I mainly concentrate on running for my physical fitness, and it works really well for me because there's a lower chance of injury versus weightlifting. Now, you don't get all big and buff, but really at this point, as a husband and father and all that, I'm not worried about getting big and buff. I'm more worried about functional strength, and I'm still able to do everything that I need to do. So running, though, increases that cardiovascular fitness, and that really does translate over to precision rifle shooting. Now, obviously, you have to be strong enough to swing the gun around and get the gun into position and hold it in position where you need it to be. But the ability to recover from stress, so if you have to run through tubes, climb things, the ability to recover and get that breathing back down, get that heart rate back down, that translates directly to accuracy with the rifle system. So cardiovascular fitness really translates well into the shooting sports. When I'm out shooting carbine or handgun, it really translates because a lot of the weekly training that I do with handguns involves movement. Same thing with carbine. I'm running through either the grid of fire or I'm running between barricades, doing that kind of stuff, and you need to be able to maintain a lower respiratory level, a lower heart rate to get really accurate shots. So I feel that running supports all my goals right now. I would love to have the time to get back into the gym and work on those compound lifts again. I really enjoy doing that. I just don't have the time for it right now. Now, when I start working up towards a specific activity or a certain goal, then I'll change my physical fitness routine. So if I'm working towards something like a tough man event, then I will usually reduce the amount of running I'm doing, and I will do more pack marches, more hiking. When Sarah and I were preparing to go down to Peru and hike the Peruvian Andes, that is high altitude, and we were going to be going out with heavy backpacking packs. So there I had to switch over and do a lot less running and a lot more longer distance with heavier weights in my pack. So it just depends on what the activity is that I have planned. I don't have a rigid physical fitness routine other than I try to run 5 to 6 days a week. I'll throw a recovery day in there somewhere, or like my Monday regular range training day, if I have to work that day as well, then the run just gets pushed out by range training. But that is my current physical fitness routine. Now, those of you guys that are competitive shooters, I would love to hear what your physical fitness routine is. What do you do to support your ability to run the gun? Leave it down in the comments section below and let me know if you're a bolt gunner, a 3-gunner, long-range shooter, competitive handgun, etc. Love to hear what you're doing for physical fitness. And that wraps it up for the questions for this Mail Call Mondays. But before we go, I want to talk about this guy that is sitting in front of me real quick. Now, first of all, this is a prototype chassis. There are some significant differences between this and the production chassis. I want to make sure I lay that out right off the bat. This is a prototype of the Modular Driven Technologies Adjustable Core Competition Chassis. This is a chassis that they just released the pre-order. It will be shipping here in a couple of weeks. We got a chance to run a prototype early and give our input on it, and I'm really excited to see the production version come out. Hopefully we will have the production version in our hands in a couple of weeks, and we will be able to do a detailed review of the production chassis, because there are some changes between the production chassis and this prototype. But the core idea behind this, the adjustable core, is really kind of cool, because this not just has the ability to add weight to the chassis, but it has the ability to add weight wherever you want to add weight. So there are 3 different systems at play here. You have these external weights here, which the chassis comes with several of them, and the external weights bolt in either through the M-LOK slots, or with M-LOK hardware they will bolt through any M-LOK interface. Then inside the barrel channel inside the chassis here, you have more steel weights that you can unscrew, and you can move to wherever you want to move them and bolt them down. And then in addition to that, you have 2 weights here in the buttstock. Now, they are removed for this setup right here because I have this chassis balanced out for the 20-inch Remington 700 with the suppressor on it. This guy balances perfect right where the Game Changer bag will go for a barricade. So that is why it doesn't have the rear weights. But if I had a more front-heavy system, heavier barrel profile, maybe a 26-inch barrel or so with a suppressor on that, then I can run the weights in the rear here, and I can move all these weights further back to help counterweight that longer, heavier barrel. So with the adjustable core system, you can really dial this guy in to get the balance exactly where you want it to balance at. We talked to you guys a little bit about this chassis before, but that was one of the key things that we had to leave out until they actually made the announcement on the product. Now, in addition to that system, which is really the marquee feature, they have a lot of other really neat features on it. One is the Arca Rail interface all the way along the fore end. So we've got this bipod here with a Really Right Stuff adapter on it, and we can put this bipod all the way back here to right in front of the mag well if we need to do that. So say we're running a barricade stage where we have to shoot prone right at the end of it, then we can run the bipod back here and still be able to utilize a bipod. We have a really aggressive barricade stop here on the front of the magazine well. So again, once you get that balance dialed in, if you're in a situation where you can't run a bag, you can run that stop right up against there. And it also allows you to run a barricade bag and have the bag push against the stop and not against your magazine. Depending upon what receiver you're using and what magazine you're using, you know that driving the barricade against the magazine can cause malfunctions. So having this big barricade stop protecting the front of the magazine works very well. You have some nice high cuts in here, so it makes it really easy to get the magazine in and get the magazine out. The buttstock is very similar to MDT's skeleton stock configuration on the ESS that we've covered in depth, but it does have the addition of the spot for the two different weights to bolt in here. So that is really nice. The skeleton stock is a very comfortable setup to shoot. We've enjoyed working with it in the past, so I'm glad that they carried that forward onto this competition chassis. Now, the grip on this has changed significantly between the prototype and the production version, so I can't show you what the difference is between the two, but the grip has some added interesting features on the production chassis that hopefully when we get that in, we'll be able to check it out. Now, the chassis is priced at under $1,000, so it is competitive for full competition chassis. And you can check that out at MDT's website, and we'll leave a link direct to that down below so you can pre-order it if you want, or if you can check out the added accessories and the different options available for it. Unfortunately, right now, the only color that is going to come in is gray. Don't get confused because you see the tan in front of me. This was only on the prototype chassis. The actual competition chassis will come out in gray, and it will come out for the Remington 700 short action first. Now, as they get rolling and as demand warrants, they will probably bring it online for other chassis inlets. So if you shoot a different rifle, just hang tight and watch. I'm sure MDT is going to open this up for a pretty broad range of inlets as they go forward. They have a habit of doing that. Quite a few of their chassis are available for a very wide range of rifle systems. So keep an eye on that. That's about it for this Mail Call Mondays. If you guys have any questions or comments over anything that we've covered, please leave it in the comments section below or send it to us on Facebook or Twitter. If you're listening to us on your favorite podcast app, you can send questions to us at 85401tactical@gmail.com. If you like the video, please make sure you like, share, and subscribe, and make sure you hit that little bell so that you get notified when we release new content. And until next time, get out and shoot.